Hello, welcome to another exciting edition of the program Inside Nilds. In today's package, Nilds election observation efforts in focus. I am Emmanuel Uhiomokai, your guide, and I'll be right back. Welcome back. In the last 3 decades, a global movement of non-partisan citizen election monitoring has collectively mobilized millions of citizens around the world to participate in their country's democratic processes as election observers. When citizens come together to observe elections, they may have a number of goals. Depending on the context, civil society or other bodies can mobilize to observe, to engage citizens in the election process, deter fraud, expose problems and irregularities, provide an accurate measure of the quality of the election, promote confidence in the process and outcomes, and provide recommendations for improving the process for subsequent elections. In the longer term, citizen election observation helps to ensure electoral integrity and strengthens civil society's capacity to promote citizen participation, engage in policy advocacy, and foster governmental accountability within and well beyond the electoral cycle. It is this realization that has made the National Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, Nilds, under the leadership of Professor Abubakar Suleiman, gave priority to election observation as an institute. Professor Suleiman's thinking is that if Nilds is to train legislators and other actors in our democracy, it should also be interested in the process that produces these actors, which is elections. This underlines the Institute's observation of polls during elections across the country since 2015 till date. From the setting up by staff of the Independent National Electoral Commission on that morning, to accreditation, voting, collation, and the eventual declaration of results, Nilds observer teams have never missed a process. The presence and operations of law enforcement agents and the rules of engagement in securing the polls were all observed. The crew also participated in meetings with stakeholders in the election. Nilds ensured that it deployed its election duties observation groups across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country during the 2019 general elections. The Institute's election observer teams were also on ground at the 2020 governorship election in Edo State. Now, before the exercise, a workshop had been carried out to train the observers who participated in both Edo and Ondo State elections. Renowned professor of political science and resident electoral commissioner of Niger State, Professor Samegu, focused on the nitty-gritty of election observation.
I think what really matters about election observation and why we take it seriously is that aside from technical considerations, aside from the fact that INEC under JEGA made investment in creating a new voter register, procured technology, including smart card readers, and then you can read the biometrics of voters. You can authenticate that the owners of the PVCs. These are all very important. But what is even more important in the electoral process is public confidence. So beyond this technical finesse, public confidence is what sustains democracy and the legitimacy of democratic regimes. And therefore, citizens' assessment of the process, and attesting to the fact that elections conform to national, regional, and global standards, then confer legitimacy on the process, more than the technical capacity of the EMB, even though that contributes massively.
A former Chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Tahiru Jega, told participants that every aspect of elections have to be observed, not just voting and announcement of results.
Observation should cover all the different three segments of the electoral cycle. Ideally, there should be organizations that will observe issues of constitutional amendments and legislative amendments, electoral boundaries, code of conduct for politicians, a legal framework for the election. Similarly, the issues of budgeting, funding, financing, election calendar, procurement, logistics, the implementation planning stages. Ideally, this should also be observed. If observation is about citizens' engagement and building trust, then every aspect of the election, and post-election should be observed. However, due to a number of reasons, it seems attention has generally been focused only on this area. In fact, until a few years ago, most election observation has, whether domestic or international, has only concentrated in this period.
Professor Jega emphasized that there was need to audit an election after each observation.
Then there is a question of audits and evaluation, which is a very, very important issue here. Technically, it is expected that the election management body, after an election, immediately after an election, should set up the mechanism and processes of auditing the work that they have done, as well as evaluating what are the challenges, what are the processes, and so on. Quite often, election management bodies relax after the election. Either they are so tired or they think the major thing is gone, and then they forget to do this. And the earlier they start, the better in terms of the integrity of the process. But many observers also don't bother to pay attention to those important issues that the Electoral Commission is supposed to do. So it is important also, post-election observation pays attention to those issues. So I call it medium term, because it's something that they ought to do within a short period of time after the election, and it's important to observe whether they do it or whether somehow they don't do it, or how effectively they have done it, and what are the processes by which they do this.
The workshop also featured an interactive session.
As an institute, there is the need to have a framework that is going to last. And we need to do things beyond just what is going to happen now, but that what we are going to do with the outcome, that whatever it is, the observations we do, what we do with it. And it is going to help in developing literature, developing policies from the kind of observations we are able to do.
You mentioned provision of kits for observation. At what stage are those kits going to be made available to the observers?
The first thing to do when there's violence is your safety first. Whether you're an observer or a party agent or even a voter. So the first thing to do is to sort of avoid the areas of violence. Then the identification for observers. The Commission is categorizing observers into domestic and foreign observers. And the Commission provides kits, which is made up of three things: the cap, the jacket, and the identity card. And the identity card for domestic observers is customized to the state you have told us you are deploying in. So each accredited observer group supplies a list of observers that are going to the field, identifying which state they are going to operate in. And each ID card is produced, customized to the state you are deploying in. And the security agencies are aware of the listed observer groups, they are aware of the ID cards.
What is important is everybody should be on best behavior to represent the institute very, very well when we go to either Ondo or Edo State. We have found it worthy, is the reason we have listed you as observers, to represent the institute, to protect the name and the legacy of the institute. So what you do on the field is absolutely of paramount importance. And that is why we feel also that this kind of engagement be organized to make sure everybody's on the same page. As to number one, what is required of you when you go on observation duty. Then number two, what will be the standard protocol for everybody to observe when we get to the field.
The Director General, Professor Abubakar Suleiman, said the importance of election observation could not be overemphasized because of its direct relationship with the question of legitimacy in governance.
I think observation of election has become one of the benchmarks in assessing the legitimacy of any government. You will come in through an electoral process, whether the electoral process is transparent, is fair enough, is free, it's been attested to, not only by the government of the day, or by the key stakeholders in governance, but fundamentally by the observer, either from within or from outside. It is on this note, therefore, that observation of election in Nigeria has become a key indices that Nigerian people used to attest the legitimacy of any government, and it has become one of the indicators by the international community to assess the acceptability of a government and the acceptability of the electoral process.
The National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, Nilds, cordially invites stakeholders and the general public to the grand finale of the 6th edition of Nilds Quiz Competition on the legislature and democracy for senior secondary schools in the Federal Capital Territory. The final will be contested by the 8 secondary education board zones of the FCT. Date, Tuesday, 13th April 2021. Time, 10 a.m. prompt. Venue, National Assembly Complex, 3 Arms Zone, Abuja. Special guest of honor, Distinguished Senator Ahmad Lawan, PhD, CON, President of the Senate and Chairman, Governing Council of Nilds. Guest of honor, Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, Speaker, House of Representatives and Alternate Chairman, Governing Council of Nilds. Partners, FCT Secondary Education Board and Nigerian Television Authority. Professor Abubakar Suleiman, Director General, Announcer.
Welcome. So we shall be looking at the issue of election observation, and I've got right here in the studio Dr. Adewale Aderemi. He's the Director, Democratic Studies of Nilds. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, initially Nilds was renowned for research and training. How did election observation become part of the Institute's mandate?
Well, the broad mandate of the Institute is to strengthen capacity for democratic governance. And maybe not covertly stated, but it was always implied, that anything that falls within the ambit of good democratic governance was going to be, bread and butter for the Institute. So naturally, especially now that we have a full-fledged Department of Democratic Studies, that would naturally, be a main staple of the institute. So I would say that maybe not covertly stated, but it is always been ingrained in the broad vision of the institute.
Okay, now let's look at the Edo and Ondo elections, the governorship elections. I am aware that Nilds was part of the observer groups that briefed INEC in the situation room after the elections. How did that play out? Tell us about it.
Well, that's correct. So I'll say that came from
prior rather robust, collaboration that we have had and engagements we have had with INEC, in different capacities. So they say, now that you're at Nilds, let's continue the engagement. That's how that came about.
So how did the briefing really go?
Well, the INEC situation room, as you might be aware of, is always stationed in Abuja here at the headquarters. And I think it starts from very early in the morning, I think about 7 a.m. until about 6 p.m. or so. Now, what they do is they have this select list of observer groups, international and domestic, to appraise the INEC leadership of field events, of things going on. So if there were, exceptional incidents, that the INEC chair needs to know, the INEC needs to know, for prompt interventions, we brief them about this. But there are two sections, during the entire situation room, duration that observer groups and the top brass of INEC, actually sit to deliberate on the goings on, about the elections. So we, for instance, the Ondo elections, I think our institute was the first to point out, to the INEC leadership, about what was going on in Idore, for instance, the violence and some of the data, field officers have reported, and copiously with photographic evidence as well. So yeah, that's how the situation room works. It's just to brief the INEC leadership of what we have observed on the field that they need to be aware of, and sometimes make very urgent intervention.
And action was taken immediately.
Most cases, yes, it was. For instance, also, the card readers were malfunctioning in a number of polling units, and I recall that immediately the INEC chair, summoned the head of ICT to intervene, and he was saying, yeah, okay, we've got this report, we've dispatched, batteries and all that. So it was very impressive. And that is what INEC does, with the situation room. You just bring things to their attention that they need to know of. But also they are very clever, very careful to make sure that only very select, credible organizations, are sitting in the situation room.
Okay, I'm sure after this whole observation, you presented a formal document to INEC as a report.
Yeah, there are two documents actually. There is, like I said, the INEC, checklist, which has to be returned within 3 days is how many? 72 hours? Yeah, within 72 hours of the election. But there's also a more copious, report, of observations of the, on the state. Now, the synopsis, the checklist is per local government. In fact, sometimes per polling, units even, So, but then you have a report that summarizes, the findings and observations of the observing group, that goes back to INEC. So 2 reports. Yeah.
Now, knowing that the history of our country, where reports become obsolete and there's no application, how are we sure that this kind of reports that have been presented to INEC become useful for future elections?
We don't have strict control over that. But what we also do as an institute is, we've teased out several, outstanding issues from this election to follow up, on, as standalone programs. For instance, what everybody I'm sure is aware of, vote buying was, a trend that was very concerning. So as an institute, we're going to do something about, vote buying based on our observation. So what we have also done is to tease out those outstanding issues, that we think warrant, special attention, to make them standalone programs that we will implement, and follow up.
As an institute, it needs planning to take its election observation maybe beyond Nigeria, West Africa, Africa, what are the plans to make its impact very significant?
The mandate for the institute is actually sub-regional.
Okay.
It's not just to strengthen, capacity in the Nigerian legislature. We have ongoing, I mean, the other day we were talking with ECOWAS, about interventions that could be made in, say, Ivory Coast and in Mali, so the original vision for the institute, surpasses the national. We're supposed to eventually make telling contributions in the sub-region. So eventually we'll get there. Some of our observers are becoming veterans now, and that I think will impact positively in the sub-region.
The National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, Nilds, cordially invites stakeholders and the general public to the grand finale of the 6th edition of Nilds Quiz Competition on the legislature and democracy for senior secondary schools in the Federal Capital Territory. The final will be contested by the 8 secondary education board zones of the FCT. Date, Tuesday, 13th April 2021. Time, 10 a.m. prompt. Venue, National Assembly Complex, 3 Arms Zone, Abuja. Special guest of honor, Distinguished Senator Ahmad Lawan, PhD, CON, President of the Senate and Chairman, Governing Council of Nilds. Guest of honor, Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, Speaker, House of Representatives and Alternate Chairman, Governing Council of Nilds. Partners, FCT Secondary Education Board and Nigerian Television Authority. Professor Abubakar Osliman, Director General, Announcer.
That's where we conclude today's edition of the program, Inside Needs. Now, before I leave you, let me recall a statement by Shen Jun Wen that says, "The road to democracy may be winding and is like a river taking many curves, but eventually the river will reach the ocean." I am Emmanuel Ohiomokai. See you.